Thank you so much for having me. In return, I was so delighted to be invited by the library. The library is one of these things that, sometimes there are things that we support, but we can understand why there could be an opposing point of view. But who can't get behind the library? And the library is like this great signature of a civilization of pooling money to make our community more educated. And making people more educated is actually relevant to some of the themes that I'll touch on today about how people end up believing something that is, according to experts, scientifically unconventional, or you might say scientifically ridiculous. And so here I'm going to screen share and in the presentation format. And the title of my talk today is Beware Humans, You're Pretty Lousy at Detecting Pseudoscience. And I had I'm glad you picked up on the title, because I had a more benign title than this, but I've been studying pseudoscience now for probably about 10 years. And I think I'm becoming increasingly frustrated and alarmed. And so I guess I'm choosing these more outrageous, upset titles. I think studying pseudoscience has made me more patient about people individually believing things, how they come to believe things that really are pretty clearly not true. But it's also made me somewhat frustrated to watch this happen at a level of society where I go, we got to be able to do better than this. Some of the things that people promote, it's like, really, we shouldn't believe in this to this level. And where I start with this is really the notion that regular people can believe in pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is a funny issue because it's something that by definition we notice in other people. It's basically contradictory for somebody to say, I believe this thing and I simultaneously know that it's outrageous, right? So we only really promote pseudoscience when we believe it. So pseudoscience is always something that you see other people do. And what humans often do is they will, I think, underappreciate how pervasive pseudoscience is by saying, oh, the people that promote that claim, there's something wrong with them. They're stupid or they're mentally unwell. And where I come from is, while that can happen, it's really important for us to recognize that regular people, I would argue the vast majority of people, promote at least one form of pseudoscience. This is something that regular humans do. And we need to recognize that so we can deal with this failing that is just part of our species. And to make this case, I'm going to divide this into 3 easy parts. And quite honestly, this is just to make it easier to digest the information that I'm going to throw at you. Part 1 is that detecting pseudoscience is tougher than people think. Part 2 is that humans have failures when it comes to scientific reasoning. They make certain mistakes that are somewhat predictable. And number 3 is that social influence can exacerbate people's willingness to believe things that experts will tell you just absolutely cannot be true. And you put these things together, and I hope by the end of this talk, I'll have convinced you how normal people can end up believing things that science will tell you there's just no way you should believe that. So let's start with the idea of detecting pseudoscience. Just this part of the talk I love. I could talk about this all day because pseudoscience is a term that most people are familiar with, and it gets thrown out a lot. And when it's thrown around, it usually doesn't come with a definition. And it mostly doesn't need to, because people generally get the idea pretty well. It's a pretty good term because what it implies is mostly what it is. So you have pseudo, fake, and science. So people know that pseudoscience is something along the lines of an argument that looks scientific, but really isn't genuine in some way. So people can do that, and they can go, they know enough to process and talk about this issue effectively. Of course, what they usually do is they usually call something pseudoscience when they don't like it. They don't necessarily call it pseudoscience because of some careful analysis. They go, oh, I don't like that, so it's pseudoscience. And when it's your own pseudoscience, it's not pseudoscience, it's science. But nevertheless, people can operate around this pretty well. The interesting thing that a lot of people don't understand about pseudoscience is that philosophers have been trying to identify pseudoscience precisely for about 100 years now. It's a long, interesting debate about what is it that distinguishes science from pseudoscience. is there a criterion or a set of criteria that we can use that will allow us, much like a mathematician can calculate an algebraic formula, is there something we can put together where we could say, okay, if it does this, it's science and not pseudoscience, or conversely, if it does this, it's pseudoscience and not science. And honestly, 100 years of this has resulted in not very much. It's been an interesting journey. Philosophers explore things like, well, is it testable? And this illustrates how science can do something better than pseudoscience, but often it will have, it will do things that are, it'll have exceptions where it doesn't do something very much, and pseudoscience will do it some. And it always leads to this failure in terms of finding a criteria that distinguishes these two. So science is generally good at being pretty testable, but it isn't always testable. A lot of science is just finding things and adding it to our fund of knowledge, right? Finding a fossil isn't really a process that's testable. It's just a thing that happens. And some pseudoscience is testable, like predictions based on astrology are testable. So testability, it kind of works, but it's not perfect. Is it empirical? Is it a careful examination of data? Well, science sometimes fails in that aspect a little bit. And pseudoscience sometimes can be really careful, like studies in parapsychology and telepathy. These could be terribly empirical. So you go, well, okay, it's not really that. And then what will happen, and you'll see this in textbooks everywhere, they'll go, well, science uses the scientific method. And even that really isn't perfect. Yes, science will go through these steps of making a reasoned prediction, then collecting evidence to support that prediction or not support that prediction. And then with enough support, a prediction will become accepted in the community or not. Yes, that does happen, but a lot of science really doesn't operate that way. It's just a collection of facts and a borrowing from other disciplines. So even something like the scientific method doesn't really work as a perfect distinguisher or demarcator between science and pseudoscience. And 100 years of this has led to basically this idea that the difference between science and pseudoscience is a fuzzy difference. It's not a clear, distinct demarcation. And so I typed in fuzzy set into Google and I found this image and I really liked it because what you can see in this image is here, you can see my cursor, I'm assuming, correct? So here you can see that this is basically a subset of something. And then this bigger fuzzy circle is something else. And yeah, there's a difference between these groups. Certainly this deep purple is, whoops, I went to my next slide, is different than this red, but the distinction isn't a perfect one. It's a qualitative one. It's not it's a quantitative one. It's not a qualitative one. And that stands in contrast to the way that we like to think about things with like Venn diagrams, where you have these perfect, neat circles that you can easily tell whether something's inside the circle or not. And this, anything here would be a part of category A, and here would be category B, and then here you would have A and B. And what I want to convey, what's important to understand is the two things are different. And after all this debate, we have to appreciate that science is different than pseudoscience. But if you're looking for one clear, easy to identify thing, you're not going to find it. It's a set of things that vaguely can cause something to be better or worse in terms of whether it's scientific or pseudoscientific. And what comes with that is there's a philosopher named Pigliucci, and he has a colleague named Bowdry, and he's done a really nice job of saying, after 100 years, there's no silver bullet that identifies pseudoscience. And unless somebody finds one and we're not expecting it, we have to accept that these two things are basically pretty big different ideas, but without a clear distinguishing criteria or a set of criteria in the middle. The best definition of pseudoscience relies on this by taking this broader abstract stance. And this came as late as 2013. And one day, I hope I meet this person. He's a Swedish philosopher named Hansen, and he really should buy me about 3 boxes of donuts because I cite this person all the time. And he did such a nice job of just saying, look, here's what pseudoscience is. It's 3 things. It's the promotion of a claim that's in the domain of science. That makes perfect sense to me. There are a lot of claims that people can make that might be ridiculous, but if they're not scientific claims, it wouldn't be pseudoscience. It would be pseudo something else. The second criteria is the claim has to be totally unreliable. Obviously, if you promote a scientific claim and that claim makes perfect sense, that's just science, right? If I promote something like, hey, objects with mass are attracted to each other because of gravity, that's not pseudoscience. That's actually a reliable claim. So that's science. The claim, a pseudoscientific claim, has to be totally unreliable. And the third criteria is, even though the claim is totally unreliable and in the domain of science 1 and 2, it has to have a community that promotes the claim as if the claim is the most reliable information. So it needs a group of people that basically says, this claim is true, even while scientists can point out how something is totally unreliable. And this is how I got interested in this whole thing about 10 years ago. I thought, how in the world in today's society do we have people that promote something that experts can tell you just isn't true? And it turns out that people are actually pretty good at doing this. Even that definition of pseudoscience is really a shade of gray definition rather than a black and white definition. And what you can imagine is, so let's think about claims that are in the scientific domain, but totally reliable. Theory of evolution, entire field of biology is based on this theory, totally reliable. And then for my own field of psychology, I was trying to think of something that I would feel comfortable saying is really a reliable finding. And I would say the evidence for stereotyping, that people can apply characteristics to group members unfairly without knowing them individually. I think the evidence with that is really pretty powerful. And so I would say, hey, those are reliable claims. We can trust in those claims. Totally unreliable scientific claims, I just picked 3. I would say astrology is particularly hard to believe, and there's no evidence to support it. The opposite of evolution, you have creationism. There's no credible scientific evidence that I'm aware of. And then flat Earth, I think most people agree. I love talking about the flat Earth because usually people are supporters that the globe Earth is correct and flat Earth is just a completely unreasonable theory. And it's hard to come up with examples of claims that are sort of in the middle, like where you go, well, it's sort of pseudoscientific, we're not really sure. But the one that I came up with would be Freud's old psychoanalytic theory that people have this detailed, symbolic unconscious that manifests itself in dreams and in lying back on a sofa and free associating. That's really a difficult thing to prove, and it's a difficult thing to disprove. And most psychologists today just don't take it very seriously. It's great for movies. It's great for watching The Sopranos and hearing, Tony talk about all sorts of things with his therapist. But it's, to me, a nice example of a part of psychology that is at best debatable and maybe, if anything, more towards the unreliable side. And again, this comes back to this notion of this is part of how people promote pseudoscience. Is it's not as easy to detect as people think. There's no one thing that the community does says, hey, you just did that, you're promoting pseudoscience. Instead, it's a set of things that can cause people to promote claims that are unreliable, more unreliable, or less unreliable. This combines with some well-known failures that people have when it comes to scientific reasoning. And one thing that I really like about talking in this area about is there's one principle that really, to me, stands out above all the others, a very powerful psychological phenomenon called motivated reasoning. You might be familiar with this. You might have even heard the term motivated reasoning. You might have heard other terms that people use interchangeably, like confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance. Sometimes people will even refer to cognitive consistency. But people will have this notion that people like to maintain beliefs that they already have. And when they get information that's inconsistent with that, it can make them feel uncomfortable. And I think the best way to understand this problem in terms of pseudoscience is to focus on the term motivated reasoning. And the term, thankfully, is pretty much what it describes. People are motivated to believe something, so they reason in a manner that helps them reach a conclusion that they want to reach. With the formal definition being people process information in a way that helps them reach desired conclusions. Now, a big part of motivated reasoning is that by definition, you don't know that you're doing this. If you knew you were doing it, the motivated reasoning wouldn't work because you would say, well, I just created this biased set of arguments to justify something because I really want to believe it. Motivated reasoning works because people bring up certain arguments in one context, And they won't realize that those arguments are stilted to help them reach a certain conclusion. And in a different context, they might bring up entirely different set of arguments to justify that conclusion. Now, I could come up with many, many examples of this in terms of scientific reasoning, but because this talk is about scientific reasoning, I want to give you a different example to illustrate this. And it's a little controversial, but I think I've managed to be nonpartisan in the way that I deliver this. And the example that stands out to me is Bill Clinton and Donald Trump both have had seemingly pretty clearly extramarital affairs in their time as politician. Now, these aren't perfectly apples to apples because Bill Clinton's was with Monica Lewinsky, who worked for Bill Clinton, which creates its own little set of problems, and Donald Trump's sexual transgressions, they have their own nuances. But I think roughly speaking, this serves as a workable example because you have two political figures belonging to two different political parties that both had affairs that are criticizable. And I want you to imagine how a person who's strongly identified with a party might interpret these two events entirely differently. And because Bill Clinton's came first, we'll start with that one. And imagine a Democrat, a strong Democrat, watching this event unfold and these accusations about, or a story about Bill Clinton having the affair that he did with Monica Lewinsky. And you can imagine a person at that time who really wants to maintain their support for Bill Clinton, bringing forth arguments like, boy, being president would be so stressful. And really what people do on their personal time isn't relevant to how well they govern the country. And the media can be so fair and it'd be so salacious. And why are people worried about this? This is generated by people trying to attack Bill Clinton. Well, move 15 years later and have Donald Trump encounter his own issues in his candidacy with sexual infidelity. That same person or those same people might interpret that event entirely differently. They might forget the way they interpreted the Bill Clinton event, bringing forth apologetic arguments for Bill Clinton. And they'll instead, because they don't like Donald Trump, will bring forth only arguments that help them reach the conclusion that this is more evidence that Donald Trump is the worst person ever. So they might think about, oh my gosh, how could you do this? This is so unfair. This is a clear indictment of Donald Trump's character. This is also going to cause political problems because it's going to make the country look weak. It's going to serve as a bad role model for children. And the other arguments that the person brought forth to defend Bill Clinton are entirely forgotten. Obviously, you could reverse this example and you could put the same arguments for somebody that was a big Republican identifier there to defend Donald Trump. And that person might have, under Bill Clinton, had the exact same opposite arguments. So people bring forth the arguments that they want to bring forth to justify something, and they don't necessarily notice that they're doing it. Now, motivated reasoning then is this meta principle that can generate all sorts of failures in scientific reasoning, particularly when people really want to believe some claim that is scientifically unconventional. There is a long list of arguments that people can use to justify pseudoscience. I have narrowed it down to the 6 that I think are the most important, but imagine somebody that really wants to believe a pseudoscientific claim. They might invoke these different strategies that are poor scientific reasoning strategies, but good enough to help them keep their belief in pseudoscience alive. So, number 1, picking only the cases that support a claim and ignoring all the anecdotes that don't support a claim. The easiest example for all of this is anti-vaccination. One of the claims that people will use, or one of the ways people will support anti-vaccination, is by pointing to children who were vaccinated and then subsequently diagnosed with autism or autism spectrum disorder. This is a terrible scientific argument. There's the entire scientific community admits and recognizes that there are people who were vaccinated and then subsequently diagnosed with autism. That's going to happen because children are vaccinated young and autism occurs later. That will happen even if the two aren't causally connected and it's totally random. The way you examine properly autism and vaccination is you would look at rates of autism development in children who are vaccinated and not vaccinated. That's a proper systematic way to examine it. When you examine it that way, there's no evidence that vaccines cause any elevation in autism. So the point of saying, well, look at these children, look, my neighbor kid got vaccinated and developed autism is irrelevant. It's completely worthless. But nevertheless, that's a way that people can use to try to justify a pseudoscientific claim. They do it with astrology, with climate change. It's bringing a snowball into Congress and saying, look how cold it was today. Yet nobody disputes that it can be particularly cold on certain days. That doesn't mean that Earth's temperature isn't warming gradually as a globe. Non-falsifiable theories, a set of beliefs that are basically impossible to refute. So psychics claim that they have certain powers, and then you put them in a situation where they can't demonstrate those powers, and they might say, oh, well, my powers come and go sometimes. And that means that no matter what situation psychics are in, they have some story that they can tell that avoids them having to disprove their claim. Dowsing, by the way, is if you don't know it, it's the process of using some sort of tool or even just your hand to try to find water. And so people will claim they have these abilities to go out in a field and find water. And sometimes people have copper. Sometimes people will claim they can find car keys with dowsing. But when you put people under controlled conditions, they can't do it anymore. And so they'll claim, well, my dowsing powers can get interrupted when I'm under stress. So they create a non-falsifiable world. People that promote these non-falsifiable theories often are unwilling to test. They probably sense that they struggle to demonstrate their magical abilities when they're put under controlled conditions. So when you offer to give them a test to prove their ability, they will often avoid those tests altogether. There was a gentleman, he was a relatively well-known magician named the Amazing Randy, if any of you are familiar with him. He secured funds and offered it grew to $1 million to anybody that could demonstrate psychic ability under controlled conditions. $1 million, and it just sat there year after year after year, and nobody would claim it. And he would get in arguments with people like Sylvia Brown, you can come take my money. And she's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to stoop to your level. And it's like, it's $1 million. Nobody ever did it, not being willing to test. Burden of proof is another important one. Do you have to, when you claim something, do we wait for the person making the claim to show evidence in favor of that claim? Or do we believe the claim until other people can debunk the claim? This distinction is really, really important because the way science works is it's much easier to support a claim than it is to disprove a claim. Bigfoot provides in any cryptozoological animal, chupacabra, mermaids, fairies, they're all impossible to disprove. I can't walk through the entire earth with a video camera and disprove Bigfoot. So the Bigfoot claim makes more sense to not believe until the burden of proof is satisfied by Bigfoot believers. This isn't perfect. Bigfoot believers would tell you that their grainy photos and their uncles who saw Bigfoot on a camping trip is evidence enough, but I'm not convinced, right? No body, no real evidence. Leave the burden of proof on the Bigfooters. Oblivious to refuting information. People get in a community and they just won't know the reasons they shouldn't believe something. They won't understand the detail that's gone into studying climate change and the research that's been going on for decades. And so they'll just be insulated from refuting information. And then the last one is science is biased. And for this, I put basically every form of pseudoscience, in my experience, uses this in some way. Why, you can ask people, why is there scientific consensus if your view is there? Why do scientists not believe in Bigfoot? And why do they believe in climate change? And there usually will be this argument of why science is unfair, right? Scientists are just too conservative, or they're all just afraid of this incredible thing that I'm going to find because it would revolutionize their field. And that's why they keep pushing us to the margins, or that some other big agency is somehow controlling them. The easy one to think of with that is anti-vaccination, right? It's big pharma has somehow influenced all these different scientific communities. And you go, well, how? Well, I can't tell you that because it's the secret conspiracy. Motivated reasoning underlies all of these. It's amazing that people can promote anti-vaccination the way they do. And when they go to the doctor, if unfortunately they find out they have cancer, they all get chemo. And so what it shows is how compartmentalized people can be. So when it comes to anti-vaccination and they might have invested in their anti-vaccination beliefs, well, why doesn't science believe that? Well, there's this conspiracy. It's big pharma manipulating all the scientists with their underhanded money. But, well, do you feel that way about chemo? No, I'm gonna go get my chemotherapy. I don't want to die. So it's just remarkable that people can use this motivated reasoning and apply an argument like conspiratorial thinking in one domain, but then they won't apply it in a different domain. And they don't really even connect the dots in how they do that. If you want to believe in anti-vaccination, all those anecdotes mean something, right? Oh, look at all the kids that were vaccinated and ended up with autism. But if you believe in climate change, you don't pay attention to the anecdotes. You look at the systematic evidence. So people will pick what they want to use as arguments when they want to believe a claim. That motivated reasoning generates a lot of these. On top of that, whoops, I went back to this slide. Humans are social creatures. They really are. We live in cities. We take pride in our village of Manlius, right? We get together at the library. Humans really don't do very well totally on their own. This is just easily illustrated. Social rejection hurts people. There are people that fear public speaking more than they fear dying. People don't like being evaluated poorly. They don't like being rejected by others. And lonely people really do pretty poorly typically with well-being. So humans just need that connection and they don't like being rejected. And on top of that, individuals tend to associate with people. The people they associate with are more likely to support their point of view than not. So people who are, again, political identity is something that's rather powerful for people. People with a particular political identity are probably more likely to have friends that match that identity. People are more likely to marry somebody that votes for the same party that they do. Social media has exacerbated this tremendously. You can develop a social media network that is largely supportive to whatever point of view that you have. You can, if you wanted to on Facebook, I don't recommend this, but you can generate a flat earth friendly world on Facebook. There are certain people that you could go to, you get on their web pages, you comment, go to a flat earth conference. I've been to one. You can meet people there. You can create a Facebook world, not even intentionally, where you're going to get an inordinate amount of feedback about how Earth could be flat or how Bigfoot could be real. To be fair to these groups, my world is very skeptically friendly. I have a number of Facebook friends that are big skeptics. And so what I see is a very skeptically friendly feed. And this can reinforce arguments that aren't scientifically sensible. In particular, I would point to the phenomenon of group polarization. If you take individuals who have a certain position, let's say they have an average position as a set of individuals, like they might support a bill on average, or they might not support a bill on average, and you put them together and you let them interact, that group will typically polarize. It will shift to a more extreme position from where people were individually. There are two mechanisms that cause this to happen. One mechanism is when you get people together and they discuss a certain point of view, that view looks more normative, presuming all of you are globers. The view that Earth is a globe seems really rather normal, and it is. It's like 98% of us. And the view that Earth is flat seems like this incredibly extreme radical point of view. But if you get a bunch of flat earthers together and you let them discuss, the idea of Earth being flat from a normative standpoint looks a lot less abnormal. So that's one way that people can be encouraged to believe views that are just scientifically nonsensical. The other avenue that can cause this, and I actually think it's the more powerful of the two, is when people are around like-minded people on an issue. They actually can share arguments and they can essentially collect arguments that support their point of view. What do flat earthers talk about? They talk about how Earth can possibly be flat. Now, because being a glober is so normative, we don't usually get together and say, hey, let's talk about why Earth is a globe. But, you know, in that group, if you were with a bunch of geologists and they were having an argument with flat earthers, right, they would promote the idea of Earth being a globe. So this is a way that people exchange arguments, and effectively, when they're invested in a pseudoscience, they can create a set of arguments that does an exceptionally good job at defending against defending a belief that is otherwise really rather ridiculous. Flat earthers is a great example of this. They have dozens of arguments that people that believe in globe Earth aren't aware of. Explanations for how Earth could be flat, the seasons, the sunset, gravity, the conspiracy about astronauts, why you see curvature looking out a window. They collect them all, and they will have a good flat earther will have a response for almost everything that you could throw at them. So this effect might be exaggerated when people are in romantic relationships, which are these really important relationships. And I put this one in for fun. Here are two people that are on, I'm pretty confident, are on a date. And then I created this very brief audience participation. Does anybody know where this is? And I don't have chat open. It's going to take me a minute to, oh, here. Oh, wait, we have somebody in chat. Okay. You can mic on. I'll give you just a minute. Can anybody guess where this is? I'll give you a hint. It's in Manlius.
Snowtop?
It's Snowtop. Love Snowtop. And I was there the other day, and I have to confess, I saw this person with the tattoos, and I was like, oh, that's spectacular. I need a picture of that. And I very subtly took a picture of it. And you can see here that here you could, it goes all the way around his calf, but here you have a Bigfoot and then an alien and then an alien ship. And then you can see on the front, it says believe. And on the other side, there was a ghost. And so I don't know if they're both big promoters of the paranormal, but he seems to be. Maybe she was, and she helped lead him into believing more in the paranormal. Maybe he is, and she's going to go along with it. I don't know, but that's another way that people can influence each other. I remember a guy giving a speech at a presentation at the Flat Earth Conference, and he talked about how his girlfriend was a glober, but in their dating, she eventually came to believe in Flat Earth through being involved with him. And he actually said she believes in Flat Earth now because she's not ridiculously stupid. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's bad enough that I'm hearing all this Flat Earth argument, but now you're actually making fun of people that believe in globe Earth. I'm like, okay, that's a bridge too far. I don't know how you're going down that road, but in any case, romantic relationships, another way that people can persuade each other. Okay, so let's put it all together. How do normal people end up believing in scientific nonsense? Well, the absolute truth is difficult to prove. Proof is a term that we often use for math, right? That you can go through a set of assumptions to come up with something that's undeniably true. You can think about this in terms of syllogisms and philosophy, but in the real world of scientific claims, absolute proof is difficult to find. It hurts me to say this, and I had to word this carefully because I didn't want anybody taking this out of context and saying that Craig Foster says globe Earth isn't real. But even the globe Earth is difficult to prove. You are correct in assuming that Earth is a globe. I am telling you Earth is a globe. I have talked to flat earthers and I have not been convinced Earth is a globe. But when you ask people, how do you know Earth is a globe? It's a lot tougher than people realize. Almost none of us have ever been high enough to just see it. So we're relying on other people. We're relying on what we've been taught. And a lot of times what we've been taught, we take it as an assumption. And so when flat earthers have these different ways of poking holes in these things, or they think that they're poking holes in it, it's awkward. And this is how they get people to listen to them and get converted from globe to flat. It's a tough road to hoe, so most people don't get convinced, and we live in a world that's still very globe Earth friendly. But if you think about it, like, how do you know Earth is a globe? It's not something that we can see or feel, even though we live it every day. Once people believe, they see what they want to see. Those specific examples of scientific reasoning, the anecdotes, the burdens of proof, I encourage people to know all of those. But the main thing underlying it is when people really want to believe, they will often find a way to justify it. And when we hang out with people that support our point of view, that community can reinforce this belief system that we have. That's often helpful, right? If you go down a certain path, the community might help you stay on track, and you might be educated in a way that's actually scientifically sensible, but it can also go poorly as well. And if you have a community of people that believe in pseudoscience, it can help reinforce your pseudoscientific beliefs. Mainly what I see is when people are confronted, when they want to believe a pseudoscience and they're confronted with evidence that refutes the pseudoscience, they'll generate arguments that find some way to keep hope alive. And they'll end up with a set of arguments that is difficult to penetrate and debunk. The only other thing I would add to this is to be sensitive to the notion of time. When you encounter people that believe something that's scientifically unconventional, you're just seeing them in that moment, and you might not appreciate all the tipping points that occurred that led them down a certain path. And so I used a Bigfoot example here with myself. It's sort of semi-autobiographical, where you're young and you don't really have well-developed thoughts about Bigfoot. It's not something that people typically worry about nearly as much as I do. But what happened to me? I majored in psychology. I did not major in biology. I ended up studying pseudoscience. I hang out with a bunch of skeptics. I'm aware of all the biases that people have in processing information, and I am absolutely convinced that Bigfoot doesn't exist. But if you took young Craig Foster, and maybe I had an uncle that took me hunting and he told me some story about Bigfoot, and he pointed out Bigfoot evidence in the forest, and that became really real to me. And I, instead of joining a skeptics group, I joined a Bigfoot Research Society. They're out there. We have one in New York. And I would end up just being a big Bigfooter, being incredulous that the scientific community can't respect what I'm delivering. On the bottom, the other group looks so far away that people will think they're crazy and stupid. And they're really just normal people that went down a different path. Okay, I'm going to end with a brief rant, and then I will let you ask any questions you want to ask, because I love answering questions. My rant is that it's important for us to understand this, because humans need to be realistic about who they are. They really do. We've done amazing things, right? We've landed people on the moon. We can get in an airplane and fly to Europe. We have snowtop. Humans have done incredible things, but they have particular failings and they have serious problems with pseudoscience. And we have to recognize that. It's not what crazy and unintelligent people do. It's what people do. And that should motivate us to take certain safeguards. At the individual level, we need to practice and get better with being able to say that we were wrong. I actually practice this in class. I have had students, I will say, just say, I was wrong. And they kind of look at each other and like, just say it. They're like, I was wrong. Like, it's okay, right? We can do it. You can be wrong and update your points of view. And we need to practice being skeptical about claims and not just believing claims because a neighbor told us. And at the group level, there's a lot of political and educational discussion that's really useful, but we need to do a better job of just keeping the nonsense out. People are promoting creationism on school boards and winning, right? This makes no sense. Basically every PhD in biology will say, this is scientifically wrong. Why are we allowing educational systems to water down that education? We need to distinguish between science and pseudoscience and keep the pseudoscience out of education. And it needs to be less prevalent in government, right or left. Both sides can have their own agenda, encourage belief systems that just aren't reasonable. When I tell class that I've gone to this skepticism conference and I tell them what it's about and they discuss different issues related to pseudoscience, I've had many students say, that conference sounds like fun. I want to go to that conference. And I always tell them the same thing. I say, you'll love that conference until that conference steps on one of your personal points of view. And then it won't be so fun anymore. You'll be there and you'll be yucking it up about, oh yeah, that claim's so ridiculous and that claim's so ridiculous. And then they're going to hit one and you're going to go, ooh, no, not that one. And that's really the challenge with addressing pseudoscience. Everybody dislikes pseudoscience until it's their pseudoscience. And then all that motivated reasoning bubbles up and they go, no. But in this case, this anecdote is real and science is being unfair. And then you go, well, it's a process. We'll work through that. But we have to do better. In order to be a better society, we just can't keep watering down. Well, we shouldn't keep watering down some very sensible, reasonable discussions about where we go politically and how we educate our children with stuff that's absolute nonsense. And that's ultimately what I love about studying pseudoscience. It's not studying the things that are sensibly debatable. It's studying the worst. It's studying the things where you go, no, just leave that part off the table. There's no scientific credibility to that whatsoever. And that's why I like talking about detecting pseudoscience. And that's why I love giving presentations like this one. So that said, that's the end of my talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.